Chapter 1. Gaylynn sat staring at the wall between clients, not able to forget the images that had gone through her brain with the last man she'd talked to. The man had complained to her for a full hour about how the police wouldn't leave him alone, accusing him of hurting a little girl in his building. As he'd told her in detail his version of the story, she'd seen the true story played out before her eyes. Ever since her father had shown her and her 6 sisters his new cell phone and computer modem back in March of the previous year, and a power failure had followed, she had seen images that she had no desire to see. Anytime someone told her a story, the images began. And no matter how emphatically someone said their story was the truth, she saw the reality through their words. Her question now was what to do about Tim. He'd been a client of hers for 2 years, always complaining of people not treating him well. She saw through the truth of his stories, but never before had she seen him do something that should have him in jail. How was she supposed to approach this? She couldn't tell something that he'd told her in therapy, but he hadn't told her this. She'd seen it while he'd lied to her. She shook her head, knowing she couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe what she'd seen with her strange new powers anyway? No one. That's who. Gaylynn glanced up when her receptionist opened her door. Mrs. Walker is here to see you. Send her in, please. Gaylynn quickly glanced at her file on Mrs. Walker, noting it was still mostly blank. She'd filled out some forms the day before, and now she was there for her first appointment. Gaylynn got to her feet and held her hand out for the other woman. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Walker. There were very few people in Bagley, Texas, that Gaylynn didn't know, but Mrs. Walker was one of them. Mrs. Walker nodded politely before sinking down onto Gaylynn's couch. Please call me Tanya. Thank you, Tanya. I'm Gaylynn. Tell me a little about yourself. Gaylynn had been through this scenario 100 times since she'd gotten her master's degree in psychology. As Tanya started talking a bit about her life, Gaylynn made rapid notes, paying careful attention to her new client's speech patterns. My little girl, Joy, was touched by a man who lives in my building, Tanya said, and Gaylynn stopped writing, looking up at the other woman. I'm so sorry that happened. Was it Tim? She hoped and prayed it was, because she didn't want there to be 2 men running around town doing that to little girls. Me too. Tanya got to her feet and walked to the window, which looked out over the park, where you could see bluebonnets growing in the meadow. The man denies it, though the police have questioned him repeatedly. Gaylynn could see the other woman's tears streaming down her face. She grabbed the box of tissues from her desk and carried it to her. How old is your daughter? Gaylynn was still unsure if this girl was Tim's victim, but it seemed more and more like it the more she heard. She's just 6. Now he didn't rape her or anything, which is good, because I'd have to hunt him down myself, but he touched her in a way that made her feel bad. Why do men think they can do things like that to little girls who have never hurt a fly? I have no idea. Joy is one of the sweetest little girls you could ever imagine. Her dad is a trucker and on the road a lot, so it's usually just us. When he finds out, he's going to tear Tim apart. Little pieces of the man's body will be everywhere. I almost think it would be good for him to be locked up, just to protect him from my husband. Gaylynn stifled a grin. The image the woman's words put into her brain were comical, knowing Tim. But it was time to be serious, and grinning about the pervert getting torn apart was not something she should be doing. Sometimes her sense of humor did not serve her well. Maybe you should tell the police that. I did. But because Tim is denying everything, I don't have a leg to stand on. And soon he won't. His legs will be in a ditch somewhere and his arms in another ditch. Roger will make certain that man never touches another child for as long as he lives. Does your husband know? Tanya shook her head. Not yet. But he will. That's what scares me. Even if I don't tell him, Joy will. She tells her daddy everything. As soon as he gets back in town, he takes her to the cafe, and he buys her a cherry Coke. Alcohol doesn't loosen a drunk's tongue the way cherry Coke loosens Joy's. It's almost scary. How is Joy at this point? Does she communicate with you about what happened? Is she frightened? She's frightened knowing any time she leaves our apartment, he could be there. I make sure I walk her to school, and I am waiting out front when she gets out every day. But what if something happens? I couldn't bear it. And the police have just been useless through the whole thing. That's terrible. Gaylynn frowned at the paper in front of her. She could picture Tanya waiting for little Joy. She even saw Joy sitting beside her father, spilling her guts while munching on maraschino cherries. Maybe you should talk to the police again? It won't do any good. They need proof something happened to her. Like a little girl would make up the kind of touching that jerk did. He needs to be locked away for the rest of his life. I might find my husband's gun myself. I need you to promise me you won't hurt him. Gaylynn didn't want to have to alert the police about the threats made in her office, but she would. She would do whatever it took to keep Bagley a safe place. Although, she wasn't sure she wanted sexual predators to be safe. I plan to talk to them again. I saw Tim looking at her again last night, and I got goosebumps all over. Will you talk to the police with me? Please? Gaylynn glanced at her clock. I can't really have the police come here, because it would frighten people. Could I meet you at your apartment after my last client of the day? So around 5? Tanya looked relieved. That would make me very happy. You don't mind? I don't mind at all. I think this town should be safe from child predators. Gaylynn knew she couldn't tell the police what she'd seen, but she could provide moral support, and she was happy to do it. Thank you. Tanya quickly wrote down her address. I'm sure you have it somewhere, but this way you don't have to look it up. Gaylynn tucked the paper into the pocket of her skirt. I'll be there. As soon as she said the words, Tanya hurried out of her office. It was obvious she didn't really want a counselor, but she needed someone to be with her when she talked to the police again. That was fine with Gaylynn. She was willing to help in any way she could. Asterisk. Zachary Jones looked at his partner, Sylvester, and frowned. Another call from Tanya Walker about the creep who was always messing with her daughter. Sylvester rubbed the back of his neck. I want to take the man and smash him into a million pieces. There's no doubt in my mind he's guilty, but we can't get proof. We have to stay calm when we talk to them. There's no point in getting angry. Zach did his best to calm his own racing thoughts as he watched the streets while his partner drove. We have to do everything by the book so when we do catch him, he stays inside for a very long time. I know. Scum of the earth like him make me want to hurt someone. Like them. We'll handle it right, and all will be good. Let's go talk to Mrs. Walker. Call came in from her place. Zachary was glad he wasn't the one driving their patrol car, because he was sure he would have been too distracted. He was consumed with anger. They pulled up in front of the apartment complex, and both men got out. Zach kept his hand over his gun, ready to use it if necessary. He wouldn't put anything past the man they were there about. Timothy Cooper was lower than pond scum in his opinion. He knocked on the door, well aware that Tim was watching him out his window. His eyes met those of the perp, and he tried to look as intimidating as possible. The door opened, and Tanya Walker let them in. Zachary smiled at the woman, knowing all this was killing her. Mrs. Walker. Hello, Officer Jones. I'm sorry to bother y'all again, but Mr. Cooper scared Joy last night. She was playing on our doorstep with her doll, with the door open. I was cooking supper, but I watched everything she did. I saw him stop and offer her a sucker to go for a walk with him. Tanya stood straight and tall, her eyes meeting his. I need him to stay away from my baby. I think it's time for a restraining order, Zachary said softly. Do you want to do that? A woman responded, her voice strong and strangely melodic. She wants him locked up where he belongs. A restraining order isn't going to be enough for a man like Mr. Cooper. Zachary hadn't noticed anyone other than Mrs. Walker in the room, and his eyes moved, settling on a tall, leggy woman with a beautiful smile. She was wearing a gray business suit with a pink blouse and heels. He couldn't take his eyes off her legs for a moment. And you are? I'm a friend of Mrs. Walker's. She shouldn't be having to go through this, and you don't want that man on the streets when her husband gets home. Is that a threat, Mississippi? Zachary asked, surprised by the woman. He hadn't seen her around town, and he'd been there for over 3 months. He thought he'd met almost everyone. It's not a threat at all. It's a concern. I'm Gaylynn McClain. Gaylynn tossed her hair behind her shoulder. What do you know that I don't, Miss McClain? McClain, was she related to the people who ran the McClain Boys Ranch? They were serious do-gooders, from what he could see. Gaylynn smiled sweetly, and her smile seemed to say a great deal to him. She knew a lot more than she was willing to tell. That was for certain. I know that Mrs. Walker is genuinely afraid of what will happen when her husband returns home. Joy will not keep quiet about her run-ins with Mr. Cooper. She tells her father everything. If you want to keep Cooper safe, I'd lock him up. Zachary frowned. I can't lock him up with no proof. Mrs. Walker just told you that she saw Mr. Cooper trying to lure Joy with a sucker. What more proof do you need? He may have just been giving her a sucker he'd received from his doctor yesterday. We don't know if it's more than that. Zachary wanted to grab the man and take him straight to jail, but the criminal justice system was more complicated than that. Have you asked him? Miss McClain asked, uncrossing and recrossing her legs. He had to wonder if she had any idea what she was doing to him. I have spoken to him repeatedly, Zachary said, wishing he could cuss the man out right there and then. But what good would it do? And he denies it? He does. Over and over again. Miss McClain sighed. Question him again. It's all you can do, I guess. That, and I agree a restraining order is needed at this point. Zachary frowned. It sounds like you're some kind of expert. I'm not, but I am a mental health counselor, and I know how Mrs. Walker is feeling at the moment. Zachary looked over at Sylvester, who had remained quiet throughout the discussion. Let's go and talk to Mr. Cooper. Sylvester nodded. We'll be back in a few minutes. Asterisk. As soon as the police were gone, Tanya looked at Gaylynn with tears in her eyes. What am I going to do if they don't take him in? Gaylynn stood and walked over to Tanya, putting her hand on her arm. It's going to be all right. I'll move in here with you to help protect little Joy if that's what it takes. Isn't that going a little above and beyond the duties of a counselor? It may be. But it's not going above and beyond the duties of a caring human being, and that's what I am. I will stay with you if that's what you need. Or you can stay with me, which might be even better. My house is small, but you two could easily stay there. Tanya's jaw dropped. You're serious, aren't you? Gaylynn nodded. I believe you. I believe everything you're saying with every fiber of my being, and I refuse to let that man touch little Joy again. Joy had been in her bedroom for the entire conversation. Gaylynn didn't feel like the girl needed to be part of the discussion with the police. Thank you, Tanya's eyes filled with tears. You have no idea how good it feels to finally be believed. The police came back then, and Gaylynn turned her icy gaze to the younger police officer, the one who had done all the talking. What happened? Officer Jones looked frustrated. He denied everything, of course. We're going to start the paperwork on the restraining order. In the meantime, do you have anywhere you can stay? I would feel better if you were somewhere farther from him. Gaylynn nodded. They're going to stay with me. She strode to the sofa where her purse was and pulled out a pen and a notebook. She scrawled her name, address, and phone number on a piece of paper and took it to him. There. Come and check on them. He took the paper, nodding. Don't think I won't. I want them safe, just as much as you do. I suggest this situation be resolved before Saturday, when her husband is due home. Gaylynn raised an eyebrow, daring him to say something. We'll certainly do what we can. Zach turned his attention to Mrs. Walker. If you would come by the station sometime tomorrow, we can get the restraining order in place. Tanya nodded. I'll do that. Gaylynn smiled. I'm going to go and help Joy pack her things. Don't let her talk you into taking more than 3 stuffed animals. She'll insist she needs 23 of them, but she doesn't. I promise. With a nod, Gaylynn set off into the little girl's room. You and your mama are going to stay with me for a few days. Won't that be fun? The little girl nodded. I like chicken nuggets. Then I'll make sure you get chicken nuggets. We can stop at the store on the way to my place. That would be nice. Together, the two of them packed her room. They had just closed up her suitcase, with a compromise of 6 stuffed animals, when the little girl said, We're leaving because of that bad man, aren't we? Gaylynn pulled all of her years of studying to be a counselor around her and answered as honestly as she could. Yes, you are. We feel like you're going to be safer at my house. Joy nodded. Thank you. I'm happy to have you stay with me. Gaylynn said with a smile. And it was true. She was looking forward to her 2 houseguests. I meant for telling me the truth. I'll always do my best to tell you the truth, Joy. Gaylynn took the girl's suitcase and then reached down for Joy's hand. Let's go wait for your mama to be finished. When they reached the living room, they saw that Tanya had already packed a small bag and was waiting. I left a message for my husband with his company, and they are going to give him your phone number so he can call me. He usually calls every night before he starts working for the day. He drives all night, you see. Sounds good. I'll make sure to give the 2 of you privacy to talk. Chapter 2. Gaylynn's house was small, but she had 3 bedrooms. They'd all be sharing 1 bathroom, but there would be enough bedrooms for everyone to have one. The smallest guest room doubled as an office, but Joy was ecstatic to stay there anyway. I'm going to fix supper, Gaylynn said as she unloaded the groceries she and Joy had chosen together. Are you all right with chicken nuggets and fries? I'll throw together a fruit salad to go with it. Sounds good. I just don't want to have to think about it, Tanya said. She walked into the room Joy would use and started helping the little girl unpack. I can't thank you enough for letting us stay with you. She raised her voice so that Gaylynn could hear her in the kitchen. I'm so happy to do it. It'll be nice to have company for a change. I keep thinking I should get a dog for companionship, but then I realize I'd have to leave him here alone for 10 to 12 hours per day, and I can't imagine what the point would be. I understand. We'll be your pets this week, Tanya said with a bit of a smile as she came back into the room. Gaylynn was pleased to see a flicker of emotion on the other woman's face. She had been feeling sad when she realized she had yet to see Tanya smile. You have a beautiful smile. That's what Roger always says. He tells me that he loves my smile, and he doesn't know how he forced himself to get up in the mornings before it was part of his life. That's so sweet. My sister just married a man from Idaho, and he dotes on her. I need to find a love like hers. Or yours. I'd settle for either. Gaylynn grinned. My sister Jessica just found a nice man as well. It feels like everyone around me is getting married. Well, I noticed that Officer Jones was giving you some significant looks today. He wanted to get to know you better. There's no doubt in my mind. Gaylynn frowned. No, he wasn't. He was just working with me to try to get you and Joy settled and happy until Roger gets home. She paused for a moment. How worried are you about what Roger will do to Mr. Cooper if he's not in jail? Very. Tanya shook her head. He's a big guy. 6'6", and his muscles have muscles. He'll chew Mr. Cooper up and spit him out, and then he'll use what's left of him to pick his teeth. I don't want him to go to prison over some lowlife. We'll do what we can to keep that from happening. I promise you. Good. I don't mind going to the police station alone tomorrow. Not after how much you helped me today. I feel safer. I'm glad to hear it. I'm going to be working from 10 till about 5. You are welcome to be here. Gaylynn led Tanya to a small cabinet. There's a key to this at the top of the medicine cabinet in the bathroom. Not inside it, but over it. Reach up there and grab it. I keep a handgun in here. Please feel free to get it out if you feel threatened in any way. I don't know if I could do that. You could to protect your daughter. I saw it on your face this afternoon. I certainly hope it won't come to that, but Joy is worth defending. Tanya took a deep breath. You're right. I know how to shoot, but I've never pointed a gun at another human being. My dad thought every girl should know how to shoot. Good. My dad felt the same. Some of my sisters refused to learn, but I was happy to know how to defend myself. I always keep a gun in my home. I actually have one in my desk as well, in a locked drawer. I think that's really smart. It's weird that I didn't feel as threatened when I was a single woman as I do now as a stay-at-home mom. People just really do strange things, don't they? Yes. They do. Gaylynn's phone rang, and she hurried to answer it. Hello? Is this Miss McClain? It was a deep voice, and it sent a chill down Gaylynn's spine. Yes, it is. Who's this? This is Officer Jones. We met earlier at Mrs. Walker's apartment. Is she there with you? Yes, she is. Would you like to speak with her? No, thank you. Just remind her to go to the police station tomorrow to get the restraining order taken care of. Of course, officer. I will. And I have a couple of questions for you. Anything you want to know? Do you like Mexican food? Gaylynn blinked. Mexican food? Of course, I like Mexican food. I'd be thrown out of Texas if I didn't. A soft laugh came from the other end of the line. Then may I take you out for Mexican food during your lunch break tomorrow? You do get a lunch break, don't you? Isn't that a conflict of interest for you? She asked. Not really. You're not a person of interest in a case, nor are you someone who has reported something to us. You're just the friend of someone who needed help. So what do you say? Lunch tomorrow? Gaylynn bit her lip, wondering if it was the right thing to do for just a moment. Yes, that would be fine. Do you want to pick me up at my office? Or should I meet you somewhere? I'll pick you up. I work the evening shift, so I have time. When is good? Say 1? And I'll be at my office. She rattled off the address of her office, her eyes meeting Tanya's. Tanya gave her a thumbs up. She'd obviously understood exactly what was going on from just the one side of the conversation. Sounds good. I look forward to seeing you, Miss McClain. It's Gaylynn. If you're taking me for Mexican food, you definitely have to call me Gaylynn. Then call me Zach. Sleep sweet, Gaylynn. With those words, the line went dead. Officer Yummy just asked you out, didn't he? Tanya clapped her hands together. He's the nicest man. He's always the one who comes when I call, and he takes the lead. His partner just kind of stands there, but Officer Jones is amazing. Yes, he asked me out. We're going out for Mexican for lunch tomorrow, but I'm not sure you can even call a lunch date going out. It's more of a meeting for business purposes. You know? No, I don't know. A lunch date is a date the same as a dinner date. With him working the evening shift, he's taking you out at the first opportunity and not waiting until the weekend. I think that's very romantic. I don't see myself dating a cop. Maybe I should tell him no when he comes to pick me up. The stress it must cause when you never know if your boyfriend is going to come home has got to be ridiculous. Sure, he'll always come home. If he has you to come home to. Gaylynn grinned at Tanya's words. She wished she could believe they were true. Tanya was definitely a romantic, though, and who could blame her? Her Roger sounded amazing. The evening flew by with the three of them watching TV bloopers and practical jokes together. Joy giggled, and when 8 rolled around and it was time for her to take a bath and go to bed, she hugged Gaylynn. Thank you for letting us stay here where we can feel safe. Gaylynn felt tears prick her eyes at the little girl's words, and she hugged her close. Be good for your mama now. I'll see you in the morning. She got up and did the dishes while Tanya oversaw Joy's bath. When she'd finished, she went in her room to lay out clothes for the next day. Usually she wore one of her business suits to work, but she wanted to feel a bit less structured for her lunch date. There was something pretty special about Zach Jones, and she was willing to dress up for him. She found a floral print dress with a full skirt that flared slightly when she spun around, and a pair of heels. She'd wear the back of her hair in a French braid, and the front would be feathered and worn high. She knew it would look good. Then she found a book and laid it on the bed. Usually she read psychology books before bed, but she was going to read a romance novel. Her sister, Marty, had given her a few, and she needed to get her head out of her work for a little bit. A romance novel was just what the doctor ordered for that. The phone rang, and she reached for the phone on her nightstand. Hello? I'm looking for my wife. This is Roger Walker. Yes, of course. I'll get her. Gaylynn called out for Tanya. It's Roger. I'll take it in the living room. Tanya hurried into the other room, and Gaylynn hung up as soon as she realized Tanya had the phone. Tanya came to her bedroom door after she got off the phone a few minutes later. I want to thank you again for all you've done for us. I thought I was going to your office just to talk to you about how hard things have been, and I ended up finding a new friend. It means a lot to me. Gaylynn smiled. It means a lot to me, too. I have 6 sisters, and each one of them makes friends easier than I do. They're all my friends, but it's uncommon for me to make a friend of someone who isn't already friends with one of them. She frowned for a moment. You're not friends with any of my sisters, are you? Tanya laughed. I really don't think so, but I guess it's always possible. Do you want to play a game before bed? I have cribbage, where we can play any other card game, I guess. Any interest? Sure. I love cribbage. Gaylynn got the board and a deck of cards, and the two of them sat together, playing for a while. As they played, they talked. Tanya told her about her near-perfect marriage. It would be perfect if Roger had a job doing short hauls. But he's on the road for 3 weeks at a time and it gets lonely. I can see that. Has he always been a truck driver? Tanya nodded. It was what he was doing when I met him, and I've always respected him for it. He's a hard worker, my Roger. I'm glad this is his weekend to come home. It sounds like you need him right about now. Yes. He'll be home for a full week, but then he'll be back out on the road. If Mr. Cooper isn't in jail before Roger gets here, I'm really afraid he'll be dead before Roger leaves again. Gaylynn didn't say what was going through her mind. As a counselor, she always had to be cognizant that her opinions carried a lot of weight. I'm hoping they can find cause to arrest him. I'll work on Zach about that at lunch tomorrow. No, you will not. You're going out with Zach as a woman who was attracted to a police officer, not as my friend. You go out with him and you have fun. I don't even want to be mentioned. I'll do my best. Gaylynn wasn't sure what else to say. At that point, the only thing she and Zach had in common were Tanya, joy, and Mexican food. She didn't think they could converse for too terribly long on Mexican food. I'll go to the police station right after I drop Joy off at school. You live 3 blocks from her elementary school, but I'm not letting her walk. I can't trust that she'll be safe. How long have you lived in Bagley? Tanya sighed. 6 months. We moved here right before school started because the school district is supposed to be so good. We wanted to make sure that Joy had the best start she could get. I've lived here my whole life, and I've never seen anything like this happen. I know you're scared now, and you have every right to be, but I hope after he's behind bars, you'll see what a wonderful little town this is. Tanya smiled. I'm sure I will. I've already found someone that I think could end up being a lifelong friend. I like the sound of that. Lifelong friends don't come along every day. No, they really don't. They continued to chat and play until well after 11. Finally, Gaylynn yawned. I'm going to be worthless to my clients tomorrow if I'm not rested. I will see you in the morning. Sounds good. And I want every single detail of your date with Officer Jones. I need to know if he's the kind of guy who pulls out chairs and holds doors, or if he's a dud. Gaylynn laughed as she picked up the game to put it away. I really hope he's not a dud. My dad would never approve of me marrying a dud, even if he does carry a gun and can protect me. I need to meet your family. A man who teaches his daughters to shoot, but only if they want to learn, sounds like an amazing father. Oh, he is. He's an Atari game designer. Well, of course he's awesome then. I can kick your butt in Space Invaders. Gaylynn laughed. We'll see about that tomorrow night. Chapter 3. Gaylynn took special care with her appearance the next morning, wanting to look her best for Zach. It seemed strange to call a policeman by his first name, but it was even stranger to call the man she was dating Officer Jones. No, Zach was what she needed to call him. When she walked into her office, her receptionist grinned at her and let out a low whistle. Hot lunch date? Lisa asked. Gaylynn blushed, trying not to be obvious, but how could she help it? She and Lisa had known each other since high school. Maybe. She walked into her office and took her seat behind her desk, wanting everything in just the right place when her first client showed up for the day. Lisa chased her in, carrying the files for her 5 clients she'd see that day. Maybe? Are you kidding me? You're telling me more than that, or I'm going to have an aneurysm. Do you want my death on your conscience? Gaylynn laughed softly. Yes, I have a lunch date. He's picking me up here at the office, so you can meet him. Does he live here in town? Who is it? Lisa's eyes were wide. She'd married her high school sweetheart and started having babies as soon after graduation as she could manage. She talked a lot about living vicariously through Gaylynn. Of course, they both knew that Lisa actually dated more than Gaylynn. She had a monthly date with her husband, so they could take a break from the kids. I honestly don't know if he lives in town, but he does work in town. I met him yesterday. His name is Zachary Jones. Lisa squealed softly. Zach is my neighbor. He does live in town. He bought the old Wilder place. And the way he looks in his uniform, she fanned her face as if to indicate that Zach made her feel very hot and bothered. Gaylynn eyed her friend and employee for a moment. Does he have women around a lot? I don't know that he's dated since he moved here. He's a super quiet neighbor. We've had him over once or twice for supper, and I really like him. I think he and Steve will end up being great friends. That's good to know. Gaylynn wanted to ask more, but what was the point? She could ask Zach anything she wanted, and she'd see the truth when he answered her. Maybe that was the point of her new power. People wouldn't ever be able to lie to her. It's time for my first appointment. You'd better go, woman the front desk. Lisa got to her feet. I want every detail about this lunch date when you get back. If I give you a miniature tape recorder, will you tape the whole thing for me? Gaylynn rolled her eyes and made a shooing motion with her hands. She couldn't quite prevent the slight giggle that escaped her lips. Despite how hard yesterday had been with Tanya and Joy, she was walking on air today. She couldn't wait until lunchtime. Asterisk. After her last appointment before lunch, Gaylynn ducked into the tiny bathroom in the office and checked her hair. It was a little flatter than it should be, so she pulled a small can of hairspray from her purse and went to work on it, making sure it looked just as it should. When she stepped out into the waiting area, Zach was calmly leaning against a wall, talking to Lisa. He straightened up as she walked into the room, his eyes meeting hers. You look beautiful. Gaylynn blushed. Thank you. I have 2 hours for lunch today. Lisa shook her head. You just had a cancellation. You have 3. Gaylynn faltered for a moment. She wouldn't have told Zach that, but she understood that Lisa wanted her to have just as much time for this first date as possible. I do have some work to do, so you're not required to keep me out for the full 3 hours. What if I want to? Zach asked. She shrugged. I guess that would be all right. Glad to hear it. He nodded to Lisa. I'll see you around. Walking to the door, he held it for her, wondering if she would call him on it. It was hard to know if women wanted you to open doors for them because it was polite, or if they wanted to open their own because it was a feminist thing. 80s women were confusing. Gaylynn thanked him politely as she preceded him out the door. Which car? She asked softly. He led her to a 2-door Toyota and opened her door for her. I hope you're hungry. She grinned at him. Women who say they're not hungry before a meal have either already eaten or are lying to you. Trust me. Women love food just as much as men do. They just like to pretend they don't. He grinned. I've noticed that, but I never say anything. I'm afraid to. Gaylynn laughed softly. You should be. Women feel really strongly about hiding the fact that they have an appetite. We're all supposed to be the size of a Barbie doll for some absurd reason. She wasn't sure why she was talking about women and their appetites, but it was better than talking about some other things, she supposed. Her sister Rebecca would probably have been talking about people bleeding out. She was obsessed with nursing, and now that she'd decided to go to med school, it was even worse. Zach pulled up in front of the Mexican restaurant, simply named Comida, which meant food in Spanish. He'd discovered it the day he moved to Bagley, and it was his mission to eat there at least 4 times per week. This place has got to be my favorite Mexican place I've ever eaten at. She grinned. We had open campus in high school, and I'd come here with a couple of friends almost every day. The waitresses know me. So you've always lived in Bagley? He asked. Does that mean you're related to the people who own the McClain Boys Ranch? Yeah, my aunt and uncle run it. My cousin Peter will take over next month after he gets married. I bet it's hard on a new marriage to take over such a huge business and responsibility for all those boys. Zach put his hand on the small of her back as he followed her into the restaurant. Gaylynn shrugged. You know, it's the way it's always been done. He'll be the fourth-generation McClain man to run the boys' ranch. The way things have always been done is not necessarily the best way to do things, he said softly. I agree. That doesn't mean my cousin does. It's something he's always known would happen. She wasn't about to get into how strange the McClains were and had been for generations on the first date. That sort of conversation needed to wait for the 5th or 6th. Why scare them off so soon? Celeste smiled at them both. Our two best customers are here together. This makes my heart happy. She led them to a quiet table off in a corner of the restaurant. Root beer and Dr. Pepper. I will be back with both. Gaylynn grinned at him. I'm not a fan of Dr. Pepper. That's okay. I'll drink your share as well as my own. She laughed softly. My sister Heather would drink a case a day if she wasn't worried about losing her shape and not being able to dance. Your sister is a dancer? He asked, not surprised. If they were built anything alike, then he could certainly see it. Gaylynn had the lithe body of a dancer as well. She is. She cheered for the Dallas Cowboys for a couple of years, but she just got married at Christmas, and now she lives in Idaho, of all places. Gaylynn frowned at her menu. She missed Heather. Idaho? Who lives in Idaho? He couldn't imagine leaving the Lone Star State for a place as obscure as Idaho. I know. She met a man who lived there, and they fell for each other. She owned a dance studio here, and he owned a ranch there. His inherited ranch trumped her new dance studio, so she found a friend to take it over. And now she lives in Idaho. Sounds like you miss her. Is she your only sister? Gaylynn laughed softly as their drinks were placed in front of them. I'll have a guisada. Queso? Celeste asked. Gaylynn looked at Zach to answer that question. Since he was the one paying, he needed to make the decision about queso. He nodded and quickly placed his order. I have 6 sisters. 6? What number are you? I'm number 3. Heather is the oldest, and she lives in Idaho. Then comes Jessica, who is about to get married. And then me, and then Rebecca, who is a nurse, but she is about to go back to med school. Then Tracy, Candace, and Marty. That's a lot of sisters. He looked like his mind was blown by the sheer number of them. What about you? Any siblings? I have a brother, Ron, and a sister, Erica. I'm the oldest. Ron is studying to be a veterinarian, and Erica is in her freshman year of college, trying to decide what to do with her life. Gaylynn grinned at that. I'm glad I'm past both of those stages. I decided early in my sophomore year that I wanted to be a counselor. Almost changed my mind at graduation because I didn't want to have to go to more school for my master's degree, but I'm glad I did. I always knew I wanted to be a cop. I started out in the San Antonio PD, but I wanted to be in a smaller town where I felt like I could actually make a difference. I moved to Bagley about 6 months ago, and I just felt like this is the place where I belong. I love this place. Of course, the only other place I know is College Station, but there's truly no place like home. College Station? You're an Aggie? She grinned. And I admit it with pride. I guess someone has to be proud to be an Aggie. He shook his head. I'd start telling Aggie jokes here, but I'm not sure they would be appropriate at the moment. Probably not. Gaylynn smiled as their queso arrived. I love queso. It's my favorite part of Mexican food. He grinned. Mine too. And comidas is fabulous. Everything here is fabulous. Have you tried their sopapillas? I think I could eat them for every meal and never get tired of them. sopapilas and queso. Maybe we should skip the entrees. Never. Their gasada is fabulous, too. I'm a big fan of their asada plate. He shrugged. I guess I can forgive you for not wanting the exact same thing I get at our favorite restaurant. Our? Wow. We have an our place on the first date. Now we just need a song. We'll pick that on our second date. You're assuming I'll go out with you again. Gaylyn's heart fluttered at the idea of him asking her out again. Already she could see herself falling deeply in love with him. She just wished there was a way for them to use her testimony in court, but visions didn't tend to be admissible. I'm hoping you'll go out with me again. Who would sit at our table otherwise? She grinned at that. You're just a little bit crazy, Zach Jones. I think I like it. He reached over and took her hand in his. Wait, are you a righty or a lefty? She glanced down and saw that he was holding her left hand with his right. Righty. Why? I didn't want to commandeer your chip and queso hand. That would not be advisable, since I am wanting a second date. And while we're on the topic, a third would be good as well. She tilted her head to one side as if contemplating what he was saying. Well, since you're thoughtful enough not to hold my chip hand, I think a second date is definitely in the works. I'm not so sure about a third, you'll have to prove yourself to me. He grinned. Oh? I'll start working on that immediately. What can I do to make that happen? Tell me about your most recent relationship. Gaylyn needed to know where she stood, and she knew that asking him questions like that was the best way. He didn't know about her power, so she could get the information she needed easily. He sighed. I was dating this girl. She was nice enough, but she was super clingy. She finally asked me to stop being a cop, and I knew that was the end of it. I am not giving up my dreams for anyone. As he spoke, Gaylyn saw a much more dramatic version of what he said. She saw flashes of a blonde girl with tears dripping down her face, demanding that he choose between her and his career. She knew which he'd chosen, and she thought he'd done the right thing. The girl looked unstable to her. I would never ask you to give up your dreams. Just so you know. I know you wouldn't. I can see that in you. I can't believe anyone would even ask. As he spoke, she saw an older woman doing the same thing. The woman raged about how she was up all night every night, waiting for him to come home. How does your mom feel about your career? The same as Mandy did, unfortunately. I had to move out so she would stop waiting up all night for me to come home. Now I call her when I'm done with my shift, and that's that. Gaylyn frowned. I'm sorry it's been so hard for you. But you're not going to make it difficult, right? Have I earned that third date yet? Thankfully their food came then, and it stopped her from having to answer immediately. Chapter 4. Gaylyn sank her teeth into her gasada, and it was all she could do not to moan aloud with pleasure. You really have to try one of these, she finally said after chewing up her mouthful. He looked at it for a moment before shrugging. I'm happy with my food, thanks. Gaylyn shrugged, dipping a chip into the queso and then scraping up some of her refried beans with the same chip. You don't know what you're missing. The topic turned lighter as they ate. I saw there was a citywide picnic this Saturday to celebrate spring. Are you going? He asked. She frowned. I haven't been to that since I was a little girl. My parents took us every single spring, and it was one of my favorite things, but then I got busy and stopped going. I think we should go. There will be food to buy. I think it's a fundraiser of a local church. It is. It's a fundraiser put on by my church, which has been helping to fund the boys' ranch my uncle runs since the first part of the century. The different people in my church all pitch in and cook something, and then we sell it for whatever. It makes a little money for the boys. She'd cooked something every year and sent it with a family member, choosing to support the boys but not attend. That's great. I can't imagine what a place like that costs to run. Gaylynn smiled at that, knowing that it was run entirely by family funds, but that the money raised in the different fundraisers was divided up among the boys, and it went toward trust funds for each of them. The boys would help serve at the barbecue, and it would help them all, though they weren't aware of the trust funds. I don't think it's cheap for sure. We don't talk about it much. Well, would you care to go to the picnic as my date? Would you mind if Tanya and Joy joined us? Joy was talking about wanting to go to it, but her mom was afraid. If you were there, Tim wouldn't dare approach, and they would be safe to go. He nodded. I think that's a great idea. I wouldn't have just offered to take them, because it wouldn't have been right, but I would love to take you and have them tag along. Sounds good to me. I'm sure they can both use a day of fun with as rough as it's been lately. I'll pick all of you up at your place? Say at 11? She nodded. That should be fine. My family will be there, so hopefully you can meet them just a couple at a time and not en masse. You have no idea how overwhelming it can be to meet all of them at once. He stopped eating, his fork poised in the air. I think that would intimidate me. It should. It intimidates me, too, and I've been part of the family since birth. There are just a whole lot of us, and my dad is kind of strange. He tries really hard to freak out the guys we date. Sounds like a worthy endeavor to me. He certainly thinks so. Gaylynn shook her head. My dad is a gadget geek. He has to have the latest thing all the time. And he programs games for Atari. It's his job. Zach couldn't help but grin at that. Sounds like someone I'd like to get to know. I'll introduce you Saturday. She wouldn't have a choice. Her family would see her with a man, and they would follow her around until she introduced them. At times, she wondered why she'd been cursed with a large family, but usually, she knew how blessed she was being a McClain. Now you tell me about your last serious relationship? Gaylynn grinned. He took me to my high school prom, and he married a friend of mine soon after graduation, and I was happy for them. Really? No hurt feelings? I knew he wasn't for me. I agreed to go to prom with him, so I could ask to trade dances with his ex and her date. They'd had a fight a couple months before, and I knew they needed to get back together. So I talked to my friend's date ahead of time, and we just planned to push them together all night and go home together. And that's how it worked. And that's your most recent serious relationship? He asked, frowning at her. It's the most serious relationship I've ever had. I've never really believed in casual dating, because I knew there was someone out there destined to be my soulmate. I never had any plans to do anything else. So if I'm only dating you to have some fun and waste some time, then you can just move on. He gaped at her for a moment, but then his face transformed into a smile. Sounds like you want something serious. So do I. Gaylynn wasn't certain if she should be excited that they were seeing eye to eye or a little frightened. She glanced at her watch, noting that they could spend another hour and a half and be all right. When Celeste came back to the table, Zach ordered sapapillas, and Gaylynn sat back in her seat and just watched him. He was good with people. She liked that. What made you decide you wanted to be a police officer? He shook his head. I'm not sure that story is appropriate for a first date. I want to hear it. More now that he'd said that. When I was 10, I had a best friend. The kind of best friend you did everything with. I spent as much time at his house as I did my own. And vice versa. We were always together. Then one day, I went to his house before school so we could walk together. I found him sitting on his front step crying. His dad had been shot and killed during the night. Local gang. Together, we vowed we'd be police officers and we would make the world a safer place. What's your friend doing now? Jake? He's an assistant district attorney in San Antonio. We make a great team. Do you still see him? Zach nodded. All the time. I still go to San Antonio at least one weekend a month to see my family and his. And to see Jake. She had seen the images in his story as he spoke about them. She had felt his heartbreak for his friend. It all made sense now. I think it's admirable that you stuck to your guns and did something to make the world a better place. A lot of people would have forgotten a promise they made when they were 10. I went to the police academy as soon as I was old enough, much to my mother's dismay. She hated it then, and she hates it now. What does your father do? We lost my dad when I was 12. A drunk driver hit him, which cemented my desire to change the world with a badge. Gaylynn sighed. Sounds like you've had your fair share of tragedy. Haven't we all? I really do want to make the world a better place. So do I. She thought about Joy and Tanya, but didn't mention them again. She'd promised her friend they wouldn't talk about her the entire time. Sounds like we'll make a good team, doesn't it? I guess it does. Gaylynn smiled as the sopapillas arrived, covered in cinnamon and sugar. She stabbed hers with a fork and put it on the small plate provided, picked up the honey, and proceeded to smother it in honey. I'm going to be in a sugar coma all afternoon. Have Lisa cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. If you really go into a sugar coma, I'll do just that. I wonder how she'd react if I brought her boss back in a coma, though. Gaylynn shrugged. She wouldn't mind. Afternoon off for her. How long have you known Lisa? He asked. Since high school. Remember when I mentioned my prom and how my friends date and I worked to set up our dates with each other? Yeah? Her husband was my prom date. Small world. Nah. Just a small town. That's how things are around here. Gaylynn ate her last bite of sopapilla and pushed her plate away. I'm not sure I can do a lot of lunch dates with you. You're going to blow me up like a balloon. He shrugged. I think you'd still be beautiful to me. She studied him for a moment, wondering if he was serious. It was hard to tell, but he seemed to be. She glanced at her watch. I have an hour to get back to the office. So I can spend a little more time with you. If you had a full hour after lunch and you were on your own, what would you do? She smiled. There's this little used bookstore on Main Street. I'd go and peruse the shelves. See what I could find. What do you like to read? He asked, putting cash on the table to cover the bill and tip. Together, they walked toward the front of the restaurant. I like to read a lot of science fiction, but I don't often read for pleasure. I feel that if I have time, I should be reading something that will do me some good. Like self-help books that I can use in my counseling. Really? I'll stick with fiction any day. He drove straight to the bookstore, and she grinned at him. Are you trying to spoil me? Yes. I want you to remember this as the best first date ever. Even though it was a lunch date. Lunch dates are fine. It worked out really well today. Within 30 minutes, they met up at the front of the store with their choices. Gaylynn had chosen a few children's books for Joy, including her own favorite at that age, Amelia Adams. She refused to let Zach pay for her purchases. I wouldn't have gotten half of this stack if I thought you were paying. No way am I going to let you. She paid for her own books, but she didn't argue when he took the bag to carry it to the car for her. It looks like you got some books for a certain small house guest. Of course I did. I love having them at my house. Is that silly? Not at all. Are you worried about what happens when Tanya's husband returns? Yes, I am. Roger sounds like he's a good man, and he's going to come unglued when he finds out some freak has been messing with his daughter. I would, too. I cannot imagine finding out someone had touched my little girl. I want to rip him apart myself, but I can't. Gaylynn looked over at him. You must be great at poker. I couldn't see that in your face at all yesterday. I know. I work really hard to hide what I'm feeling when I'm on the job. But trust me, I'm not letting him get his hands on Joy. Ever. They drove back to her office, and he took her hand in his. I want to kiss you. She sighed. I don't want my first kiss with you outside my practice. I've worked too hard to grow a good, professional reputation. I can understand that. In fact, I was pretty sure you'd say that. So I'm going to walk in with you to your office, shut the door, and kiss you until your toes curl. All right? My toes are going to curl? Only if I do it right. He slid out of the car, grabbing her bag of books from the back seat. She must have bought 15 books. He could see she wasn't kidding about that being her favorite place to stop on the way back to the office. He held the door for her, and she walked in. Lisa was at her desk, looking at her expectantly. When Zach trailed in after her, Lisa's whole face lit up. We'll be in Gaylynn's office for a moment. Imagine a huge "Do Not Disturb" sign on her door. Zach didn't wait for a response. Instead, he walked into the office, waiting as Gaylynn followed him. She looked up at him for a moment, shaking her head. I'm not sure this is the time or the place. It's both. Trust me. He caught her waist in his hands and pulled her close. Unless you don't want me to kiss you? She shook her head, and he dropped his hands. No. I mean, I don't not want you to kiss me. It's English, so double negatives mean I do want you to kiss me. See? I'm confused, but I have permission to kiss, so I'm going for it. His hands went right back to her waist, and he pulled her close. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. Gaylynn wrapped her arms around his neck and held on for dear life. She'd only been kissed a couple of times, because she'd always been the studious one in school, and she'd rarely been asked out as a result. She moved closer to him, her lips moving under his. By the time they parted, they were both out of breath. That was a kiss. Gaylynn knew she sounded silly and breathless, but she couldn't help it. Her other kisses had been pretty lackluster in comparison. He laughed softly. Sure was. Did your toes curl? I think they fell off. I can't feel them anymore. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Can it be a good thing to be toeless? Is that even a word? No idea. He dropped his forehead until it rested against hers. I'll pick you, Tanya, and Joy up at 11 on Saturday morning. We'll be ready. I'll call you when I can, but I work night shifts for a few days. That's fine. I don't need to talk to you every other minute. He frowned. What if I need to talk to you every other minute? Did you ever think of that? I guess not. I was just trying to tell you that I'm not like my college roommate who had to spend hours on the phone with her fiancé every night breathing at each other and saying, I love you over and over because they had nothing in common and therefore nothing else to say to each other. Well, I'm glad to hear it. He leaned down and brushed her lips with his briefly. See you Saturday. And he was gone. Gaylynn stared after him as he left, wondering what on earth had just happened to her. She'd agreed to a kiss, but she hadn't expected one kiss to change her entire life. Chapter 5. Gaylynn walked around in a bit of a daze for the rest of the day. When she returned home, she found Tanya and Joy at the table doing homework. She pulled the Amelia Bedelia book from her bag and set it on the table, and Joy picked it up. I haven't read this book yet. It's a favorite of mine. If your mom doesn't mind, maybe we can read it together later tonight. Gaylynn walked into the kitchen to start supper and found that there was already a big pot of chicken and dumplings on the stove. "That smells good." Tanya grinned at her from the table. "I figured if you were giving us a place to stay, the least I could do would be to make supper." "Thank you. I really appreciate it." Tanya looked at her daughter for a moment. "Why don't you go put your new book in your room?" "How did it go at the police station today?" Gaylynn asked as soon as the little girl was out of earshot. "Oh, that was nothing." "How was your date with Officer Sexbot?" "Officer Sexbot? I'll tell him you called him that." Gaylynn grinned. "It was amazing. We had the same favorite restaurant, and we had a wonderful time." "Did he kiss you?" Gaylynn blushed, and she knew that answered the question for her. "Maybe." "Maybe?" Tanya laughed softly. "That must have been some kiss. He told me he was going to make my toes curl with a kiss, and I didn't believe him. I was wrong. I swear they must have fallen off halfway through that kiss, because I still can't feel them." "Wow. I'm jealous." "Why would you be jealous? You've got a man you love." Tanya shrugged. "I do love Roger with everything inside me, but it's not new love. It's not first kiss and hand-holding new love. I guess I'll just have to live vicariously through you." Gaylynn shook her head. "I need to introduce you to my receptionist, Lisa. She says the same thing. There's just something special about new love. It's certainly not worth giving up on proven love, but it's still special. It's why women read romance novels and watch romantic movies. We want to experience that new love over and over and all the special tingles that go with it. I think you're being silly, but I'm glad you're excited about my new love." Joy ran back into the room then, and the conversation immediately changed. "How was school, Joy?" Gaylynn asked. "It was good. But Tommy Jacobs sat next to me for lunch again, and he's not very nice. He always tries to drink my milk." "Doesn't he have his own milk?" Gaylynn asked. "He does, but he wants mine instead. He's mean." Joy climbed back onto the chair at the table with her mother. "Let's work on my reading some more, Mama." Gaylynn was surprised at how much freer the little girl seemed today than she had the day before. Everything seemed to be looking up for them all. Asterisk. By Saturday morning, Gaylynn was very ready to see Zach again. He'd called a couple of times, but it had always been quick. She hurried when she heard the knock on the door. "Good morning, officer." "Good morning." He winked at her, turning to see Joy standing beside her mother. "You look lovely this morning, Joy. Why aren't you wearing your uniform?" Joy asked, her brow furrowed. "Can you still protect us without a uniform?" "I can. I'm trained to protect beautiful ladies, no matter what I'm wearing." Zach smiled at Tanya. "I do want the two of you to stay close if you can." "We will. Thank you for allowing us to tag along on your date. I'm sure that wasn't at the top of your list of things you wanted to do today." Tanya seemed almost nervous to go, but she was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, so she looked ready. "I'm happy you're able to go. When does your husband get home?" Zach asked. "He should be here between 6 and 8 tonight. We talked last night, and he's pushing to get home tonight." Zach turned back to Joy. "Are you ready to see your daddy?" "Yes. He's going to take me to the cafe and buy me a cherry Coke." Tanya laughed. "And you're going to tell him every bad word I said and every cent I spent while he was gone." Joy grinned at her mother. "It's the way things work." "I know it is." Tanya pulled one of Joy's pigtails lightly. Zach glanced around the small house, liking what he saw. It was very neat, but he wasn't sure if it was that way because Gaylynn had cleaned knowing he was coming or if it was because she had guests. Maybe she always kept it that clean, but that would take a lot of effort with the number of hours she worked. Are we all ready? He asked. Gaylynn nodded. We've been ready forever. You're late. He glanced at his watch. It's just now 11. But if you're not 15 minutes early, then you're late. My daddy taught me that. Great. I'll do better next time. Zach grinned at her, taking her hand and pulling her toward his car. Do you mind if we take my car? Gaylynn asked. It's easier to get in and out of. Her car was 4-door, while his was only 2. He shrugged. Can I drive? She rolled her eyes, but handed him the keys. She wasn't a huge fan of driving anyway. If he wanted to drive them, more power to him. Just be gentle. No tickets. He sighed. I'm a cop. I'm always safe. Joy giggled. You don't look like a cop. You're wearing a t-shirt. He grinned down at the little girl as they all piled into the car. Let's go have a party. Anyone else ready for a big picnic at the park? I am. Joy yelled from the back. She seemed to not even be worried about running into Tim. There was safely in numbers. When they got to the park, the first person Gaylynn saw was her mother, who was sitting behind a table selling baked goods. Her father was manning one of the grills. Her sisters seemed to be all over the park, one flirting with a stranger to Gaylynn, one scooping potato salad onto people's plates. Let's eat, and then I'll hunt down all my family members to introduce all of you. Gaylynn said. Are there that many? Tanya asked. At least 1/10 of the people here have McClain blood or are married to a McClain. Have you heard the expression about swinging a dead cat? They got into the line and picked the things they wanted from the food offered. Gaylynn's sister Marty was manning the potato salad. Are there raw onions in there? Gaylynn asked. Yup, but Mom said you'd be here, so I have a small bowl just for you. Marty picked up a small styrofoam bowl and handed it to her sister. Thanks. I hope you didn't bring Mom your laundry. Gaylynn said with a frown. Mom likes doing my laundry, Marty retorted. Gaylynn sighed. This is my youngest sister, Marty. Marty, this is Zach, Tanya, and Joy. They're my dates today. 3 dates? Wait till I tell Dad. Gaylynn moved down the line. Her sister Rebecca was scooping baked beans. She plopped a spoonful on Gaylynn's plate without asking. Maybe I don't want beans. Please. You love beans. Rebecca looked at Zach. Aren't you the new policeman in town? Yup. I am. Zach Jones. Rebecca McClain. Another sister? Zach asked Gaylynn. Ready to swing that dead cat now? Gaylynn asked. Rebecca wrinkled her nose. You have such a way with words. Gaylynn went to the end of the line to pay, finding her sister Tracy at the cash box. Hey, you. Tracy grinned. Who's the guy? This is Zach Jones. He's new in town. And these are my friends Tanya and Joy. Wow. Group dates. At your age? Tracy took money from Zach and gave him his change. Talk to you later. Gaylynn hurried away. And now you know why I don't go to picnics in town. They have as many McClains as there are ants. There were no empty picnic tables, so she chose the table with her cousin Peter and his fiancée, Lillian. Mind if we invade? Peter tore his eyes from Lillian's to shake his head at her. Nope. There's always room for family. Gaylynn set her plate and root beer on the table. Zach, this is my cousin Peter and his fiancée, Lillian. This is Zach Jones and my friends Tanya and Joy. Nice to meet all of you, Peter said politely. Peter was always polite. Peter will be taking over the boys' ranch after his wedding next month. Oh, so you're the lucky one who gets to do that. Gaylynn mentioned you earlier this week. Zach offered his hand to shake Peter's. Yeah, that would be me. I get to inherit all of the boys as well as the ranch. Is that good or bad? Zach asked. Peter shrugged. I'm not really sure. I'm not dreading it, because I've known my entire life that's what I'd end up doing, but it feels a little overwhelming at the moment. Lillian smiled, a calmness behind her eyes. I think it's wonderful. I can't wait to have all of those boys to mother. Peter sighed. We're very excited. Obviously, Zach said with a grin, sitting at the table and picking up his fork. Joy sat across from him, and it seemed deliberate. Zach immediately looked around and spotted Tim standing off to one side, his plate of food in his hands. Don't worry, Joy. Joy smiled. You're here to protect me. I am. There's nothing more important for me to do today. Nothing. Okay, Joy said. She seemed to stop worrying as she picked up her fork and started eating. Galen's eyes went to Tim as well, and his narrowed at her. And then he started walking toward them. She reached out and took little Joy's hand. Hello. If it isn't my favorite counselor. What are you doing here? It's a city picnic. I'm picnicking. Gaylynn took a sip of her root beer, wondering how to proceed. What are you doing here? Just looking around. With those words, Tim wandered off, and Gaylynn looked down at little Joy. Everyone at this table is safe. If you get scared, you just call out, all right? Yes, I will. He can't scare me anymore. My daddy will be home today. Galen's eyes met Zach's, and she knew he could see the worry in hers. It wouldn't be good if Tim was still walking around freely when Roger got home. Peter asked no questions, but he'd obviously watched the whole thing. His eyes met Galen's, and he nodded as if to let her know he was ready to help if needed. She smiled her thanks. As they ate, different members of Galen's family drifted over. Her father came and stood looking down at Zach for a moment until Gaylynn introduced him. Dad, this is Zach. He's a police officer here in Bagley. Zach, this is my father, Bob McClain. Zach got to his feet and offered his hand to her father. It's nice to meet you, Mr. McClain. Nice to meet you, too. Come over for Sunday dinner tomorrow after church. Zach nodded. I'd be happy to, sir. Gaylynn hid her face. An invitation to Sunday dinner from her father? Zach was going to be overwhelmed with McClains. He'd live. After lunch, they wandered around talking to different people they all knew. Zach knew a few people that Gaylynn didn't, and Tanya knew lots of the mothers of girls Joy's age. As they walked to different places in the park, all of them were very aware of where Tim was at all times. The danger to little Joy was real, but there was no way any of them were willing to keep her locked up to keep her away from the creepy man who was after her. At one point, Gaylynn spotted Tim talking to another little girl, and she was about to tell Zach when she noticed a woman take the little girl's hand and pull her away from him. He's looking for someone, she whispered softly to Zach, who looked down at Joy. Can I hold your hand? It would make me feel safer. Zach knew the little girl would see right through him, but he hoped she'd hold his hand anyway. Joy grinned up at him and put her hand in his. I feel safer, too, because I know you have a gun. I saw it. You saw it? Zach said, surprised. Not much got past the little girl. Yup. It's on your leg. It is. I won't let you get hurt. That's 'cause you're a policeman, and it's your job to keep little girls safe. Joy smiled and pulled him toward the swings. And to push them on swings. Zach looked over at Gaylynn helplessly. Obviously, she knows what she's talking about. Obviously. He went to the swings with her and pushed her, realizing it gave him a good vantage point. He looked out over the park, his eyes going from child to child until he again found Tim, looking at a little girl who was close to him. He was obviously looking for a victim. When he saw Tim squat down to talk to a little girl, one younger than Joy, he nodded to Gaylynn and started moving slowly. He needed to catch him in the act, to be able to take the man in. As he was almost caught up to them, Tim picked up the little girl and started carrying her into the woods. The girl was sucking on a sucker and seemed to be quite content. As Tim got to the edge of the woods, Zach started running, and he looked over, seeing Peter running as well. Without speaking, they each went a different way in the woods, wanting to find that little girl before she was hurt. Zach found them not too far in. Tim was telling her not to yell. Zach pulled his gun from his ankle holster. "Police. Put your hands up." In his 10 years on the force, he'd never fired his gun in the line of duty, but this time, he wanted to. He wanted to shoot this man more than anything. Tim's hands went up, and he turned around, a look of disgust on his face. You have the right to remain silent.